walking in a country road, and I've been chasing after my shadow.
Welcome back to the Camino Podcast, episode 114. I'm Dave Whitson.
Nobody asked me my name.
Well, I've got some good news and some bad news for you today. Good news first. I'm dropping 2 episodes today. It's BOGO podcasts. The bad news is that it's going to be a while until the next one. I made it home from Spain in late April, and I've known for a while that I'd have roughly a 2-month window back in the Pacific Northwest before I hit the road again. I'm setting out tomorrow to co-lead a coast-to-coast relay across the USA on the American Discovery Trail. I'm not sure when I will be back. I thought I would have produced at least a handful of podcasts for you in that window. Instead, it has been chaotic, tumultuous. In hindsight, if I had been more proactive and on top of things, I really should have gotten a couple out in May. But June was a hell of a year. So I'm sorry to leave you all hanging, but hey, the podcast has a long tradition of extended stretches of radio silence. So this is just kind of the deal. I'll be back again at some point. For now, though, this episode is a reporting out of the 5 weeks I spent mostly in Spain, following a short appetizer in France. Fortunately, it's not a lecture. My guidebook co-author, Laura Perazzoli, jumped in to serve as my interlocutor, and it turned out there was a lot to talk about. The conversation that follows pings around between the Voie Littorale on the southwest coast of France, the Camino del Norte, the Camino Lebaniego, my first jaunt and my second on the Camino del Salvador, as well as the Mar and the Inglés. And then it also gets into some bigger picture stuff. No further preview required. Thanks for listening. Laura Perazzoli, this is the second time you've been on the pod, co-author of multiple Camino guidebooks with me, former co-leader of student trips. And last time you were on, I didn't check what year it was because it would have been disturbing and dispiriting, but it's been a little while. And that time we had both been making the rounds in northern Spain over the course of the summer. And so we were just reviewing each other's experiences. This time around, I was the one on the road, so it's going to be you just interrogating, you firing the questions at me about my experiences in northern Spain. And so with that, my work is done here, and I'm turning the keys over to you, and you're running the show. So take it where you will as we talk about my last 5 weeks in Spain.
Yeah, I mean, mainly I'm really curious to hear a couple different things. One, all about your experience, but also sort of what the major changes to the guidebooks are. You're sort of taking them over at the moment. And, I know that there's some big changes for the guidebooks. And then, yeah, so I'm curious to hear how that's going to shake up.
Well, the biggest change is that after should we not conversation for basically as long as the book has existed, the Camino del Norte and Primitivo book is getting split. And you and I think we're both united in our resistance to that for a long time, in part because I think we both agree that if we could only do one trip, our preference would be to walk the Norte to Via Viciosa and then veer off onto the Primitivo. And you get all the great coast and beaches on the Norte, and then you get the lovely rural mountain walking on the Primitivo and a couple great cities as well. So didn't want to have a book that didn't reflect how I would want to walk it. Well, finally are turning the corner on that. And there's a few reasons. One is that we can't make the book any bigger. People already complain about the size and the weight. And every year I go back to the Norte, I walk more variants. I find more alternatives. And so the last couple of reprintings, we've just been shoving more stuff into this book within the same footprint. It just doesn't work anymore. The Norte needs more space to be able to reflect all of these different options. So that's one thing. along with that, I think more people are discovering the Salvador. I've known about it for a long time, but just never had the space to do it. You did it some years ago,
Hmm.
and it is just such a natural partner with the Primitivo. I think a lot of people are doing a Salvador Primitivo combo, or maybe they're
Hmm.
even starting on the Camino de Madrid or the Vadiniense and Lebaniego. So there are ways that you can create, an 800-kilometer walk that is different from the Frances or the Norte that gets you a lot of beautiful scenery. So for me, I feel guilty about having a really short book, and the Primitivo is like right up against like how short it should be. And so being able to have Primitivo Salvador, it'll be a smaller book. It'll combine these two routes. I think that that's a really good thing, and to get a few more people on the Salvador, but maybe not too many. So
Hmm.
that's the other big factor. I think there are a lot of people who are walking the Primitivo who never considered our book because it's just like, why have a bigger book with the Norte?
Right.
My view's always been like, hey, get more bang for your buck. Like, why buy two books when you can buy one? But I think we're at the point now where it makes sense to change. And the last thing I'll say on that, because I've already talked for too long on this subject, is back when we started, you had to have the print book. And so if you set out and thought, I'm going to walk the Norte the whole way, then you changed your mind, you met some people, you wanted to fork onto the Primitivo, well, what are you going to do? You don't have that book if it's a Norte only guide. But now there's
Hmm.
ebooks. Now it's a lot easier to pivot midway.
Hmm.
And so I think that also helps. It doesn't feel quite as bad to put a person in a position where they decide to make an adjustment and they need information fast.
Totally. Yeah, that makes sense. And I think too, as I know there's so many more variants on the Norte every time you go that it makes sense to have the space for that.
I might have finally gotten to the point where there aren't that many more, at least not that many more that are kind of practical. Like the Holy Grail is finding a way to get out of Quijón and
Hmm.
follow the coast or just really bypass that whole mess. But when you study it on a map and you factor in the rivers that don't have bridges, it would just add so much distance to the Norte that I don't think it's a viable option. I think at this point I have set foot on just about all of the like viable practical alternatives if you still technically want to see yourself as following the Camino del Norte.
Well, that's exciting. It'll be good. So it'll be three books now that you have for the Northern Camino.
Yeah, well, it was once one book when we started out, just
Right.
Northern Caminos. We
That's right.
split off the Inglés some years ago and added the Mar to it. That also illustrates kind of my thinking about this, which is like, if we're going to split the book, we want to add value to it. And
Absolutely.
it's particularly nice if we can spotlight an underutilized route. So that was the idea with the Inglés that, hey, this is a way for us to be able to put the Mar in print. And it's still the only Mar guidebook in existence. And now we can do the same with the Salvador.
Absolutely. Well, do you want to dive in on, is there a route you want to start with? I know you've rewalked a bunch of them. You want to start with the Salvador because we were just talking about that, or dive
Sure.
into the
Yeah.
north? Okay.
Yeah. I mean, the Salvador, it was my first time doing it, right? So that's the most exciting
Yeah.
out of all of these. And the way I did it is I started by walking it in the wrong direction. So the Salvador goes from León on the Camino Frances to Oviedo. And it goes back to that old saying, I'm not going to get it correctly, but like he who goes to the servant and doesn't visit the master has like really screwed up. The idea being that if you walked on pilgrimage to Santiago de Compostela to see the relics of St. James, but you passed the relics of Jesus in Oviedo, then you got your priorities out of whack. You got to make that detour. And so the Salvador was the way to get from the Camino Frances up to Oviedo and the precious relics there. And then the Primitivo could bring you back to Santiago de Compostela. And so
Hmm.
that's the historical idea behind it, and why, again, it makes a perfect combination with the Primitivo. So León to Oviedo. But in this case, I started by walking at Oviedo to León, and then I immediately turned back around and walked León to Oviedo. And I did that because, A, if you're writing a guidebook, like ideally you would have walked the route more than once. And
Totally.
I didn't know, this was April. So I was preparing myself for really bad photo weather and kind of need good photos. So having two bites at the apple was going to be helpful. But then the other part is that there are always variants, right? There's always
Hmm.
alternative routes. And on the Salvador, those are particularly important kind of at the beginning and at the end, where the
Hmm.
official route can involve a lot of pavement coming out of Leon, but you can
Yeah.
also follow the river and it's a lot nicer. So doing it twice meant that I could hit every significant alternative route and also do the main route all the way through.
How was it walking it in reverse?
From a waymarking perspective, it was mostly not an issue. There
Okay.
were a few places where I couldn't find the way forward, but I had the GPS, so it wasn't an issue. So, there were no dramatic wrong turns or anything. I would say I think the views are better going in the wrong direction. Obviously, the landscape's the same, but one of the things you learn on the Camino or on any hiking trip is that sometimes the best views are behind you and you have to like stop and turn around.
Totally.
It's also possible that my perspective is skewed because that was my first time through, and first time through can be more memorable in so many ways. But I think the views were better. On the flip side, good Lord, it's harder going in the wrong direction.
Is
Because if you think about it, like Leon, I don't remember exactly what its elevation is, like 800 meters. I mean, it's not low, and Oviedo is much closer to sea level. So the Salvador is
okay,
already a
yeah.
mountainous route, but then you're adding on like 600 more meters of ascent. So I hadn't connected the dots when I set out, but when I got through the mountains on the Salvador the first time, I was just like, wow, that is a hard route. And certainly it's a strenuous route. You're crossing the mountains, but it is not nearly as challenging or strenuous going from Leon to Oviedo.
That makes perfect sense. And how was dropping into Leon? Had you been there for like,
It had been a decade. It had been a decade since I was in Leon. Walking the Norte, walking the Primitivo, like the way that we ended some student trips on the Via Podiensis. Over the years, I've gone from like San Jean Pied de Port to Pamplona. I've gone, from Melide to Santiago at the end of the Norte. I hadn't been in the middle for so long. And the single biggest change was it felt like I had just gone from a Spanish speaking country to an English speaking country. It wasn't just that I was hearing English everywhere all of a
yeah.
sudden. It's that people led with English.
Oh, wow.
The host in the hostel, the guests, everyone around, like you sitting in the dining area, English, 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 English. That was weird, right?
That
Like
is weird. I mean, even the last time I walked the Francais, that was the case that people led with English, I don't think.
yeah, I mean maybe in some places,
Maybe
right?
if,
Some
yeah,
towns, but yeah, it caught me off guard. It's one of those situations where you're checking into the hostel and the person addresses you in English and you're reflexively answering in Spanish just because that's what you've been doing for a
totally
while.
what you're used to. Yeah.
Yeah, so I mean there was the Norte, like there's definitely some English, right? Like there's a lot of
Oh, of
British folks who
course.
come down and vacation there. There's a lot of experienced pilgrims who are coming from English speaking countries, but it's Spanish first, and then on the Salvador, the Lebaniego, it's almost Spanish exclusively. Like there's very
Right.
very little English. So yeah, Leon, an English speaking place, and then walking around and realizing that I can get basically any type of food. So you are struck, or I was struck by just the abundance of creature comforts and
Mm-hmm.
reminders of home. And part of that,
Mm-hmm.
part of that's Leon's a big city, right? So big cities are going to be different from smaller towns along the way. But could definitely feel how the Francaise had been evolving to accommodate and meet the needs or desires of all of the people coming through. And yeah, it felt pretty different. But when we took students through Leon, I think there were two albergues, like the nuns in the center,
The
and
nuns.
then there
Yeah.
was the hostel place that we used out kind of close to McDonald's, kind of outside of the center. And that was it. And now, I don't know how many total hostels and albergues there are, but there are a lot of options. So the pilgrims spread out their
Okay.
impact all over the place.
That's interesting. Okay, cool. And then how was the albergue and like food situation when you were on the Salvador? I remember when I went on it, like the views were amazing and the places I stayed were great, but I had one day where I think I had two opportunities for bars and both were closed and I only had like a machine coffees in the morning and I just remember dragging that whole day.
Yeah, so the first stage for some people will end in La Robla, which is a town that has a lot
Hmm.
of services. And then from there, it's almost all the way to Pola de Lena until
Hmm.
you really have a lot of services again. And so it could be rough. The advantage I had over other people is that I was doing the Salvador in like 3.5 days
Yeah.
each way, and there are a lot of people who do it in 5 to 6 stages. And especially they slow down in the mountain stages. So they'll have 15-ish kilometer days there. What that meant was when I was walking back from Leon to Oviedo, in La Robla, I could buy whatever food I needed to have for dinner and then breakfast the next morning. And that was all I was going to need, right? Because then I would be
Hmm.
back. So for me, it was basically just one day of food that I had to be prepared for. But the people who were doing 3 days through the mountains where there are basically no services, I arrived in Payares, also Pajares. Locally, it's Payares.
Is there an albergue there?
There is an
There
albergue.
is now. Okay.
Yeah, it's a really good, like the host is just a marvel. Like she's great.
Is it in that monastery or that, I don't know. There was something for sale there when I passed through that I was like, this should be an albergue. So I always wondered about that.
Yeah, not there. There, it's interesting. Before Pajares, there is an
Hmm.
old parador that's like up on a hilltop, like
Okay,
overlooking
yeah.
this huge valley below.
Yeah, yeah. I think that might be what I'm picturing. Yeah.
So the interesting thing about that is coming from Oviedo, I saw it in the distance the whole time, but the way the route works, I didn't actually come to it. Like I went all the way
Okay.
behind it. So I got to Leon and I was like, what was that place?
Yeah.
Like I need to see it on the way back. And then on the way back I realized like how it's right in front it's right in front of you. Like you see it the whole
You
time
just
and it's
miss it
yeah,
totally.
it was behind me. So today it has just a cafe, but the cafe was closed when I was there.
Okay.
Apparently, other people hit it, so sometimes it's open, sometimes it's not. But in Pajares, it's basically one of those like almost identical old schoolhouses that have been converted into
Yeah.
albergues all over. But yeah, the woman who is the hospitalera, I think she's been there for 18 years, like really long time, taking care of pilgrims. But when I checked in because I don't remember how far I went, but I checked in like multiple hours after the other people who were
Yeah,
already
yeah.
settled there. Everyone immediately was just like, you have to call the bar if you want to have dinner. You have to schedule that. Like you probably should have scheduled it yesterday.
Yeah.
That's the
Okay.
mindset that they all had because
Yeah.
there is food available on the Salvador because they know pilgrims are coming through. You have to plan for it more, or you carry and you cook. There are some places that have like Payares also has a vending machine, and it had enough stuff of substance in there that you could survive on the vending machine if you had to. You just wouldn't be thrilled about it.
That's something I experienced. Like, I got fortunate, but I didn't realize how crucial it was to be making those reservations and things. Like, I think I told you when I went to and stayed at Pendueños, I showed up really late and my phone didn't work. And like, I don't know if I had service or if I'd even set it up to work except for like with Wi-Fi. And like a neighbor called the hospitalera who brought me, just a ton of food and they were so kind, but I definitely had a moment of like, I'm just like out here waiting to get in and I don't know what I'll do otherwise.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't have service when I'm walking, so it's same thing, Wi-Fi only. So I try to preempt a lot of
Yeah,
that. The difference now is that you didn't have then is WhatsApp. And so like I try to get with all of the hospitaleros ahead of time and give them, estimated
totally.
arrival time and all that stuff. But yeah, it's still like Bendueños especially. It's like if you're stuck out there, it's going to be cold and there's not a lot of good options.
Yeah, that's exciting. It'll be a good addition to the guidebooks to have that in there.
It's exceptional. It is such beautiful walking. It's basically all of the stuff people say about the Hospitales route on the Primitivo. That's the middle of the Salvador. It's every bit as beautiful and every bit as exposed and out there. So, if you like the Hospitales, you should walk the Salvador.
Yeah, it's stunning. I think it's really memorable. I loved walking that route.
It was five, six, seven other pilgrims daily that I saw when I was out walking there in mid-April. It could
Okay.
be a good time to walk, but also could be a dicey time. Like there were a few snowflakes on one day. Everyone kept talking about how bad a year it was for snow and precipitation in general. So,
Hmm.
you could get there in early April and have a blizzard, right? So it certainly
Totally.
is a place where there's high variability in terms of what the weather will bring. So, I imagine it's more crowded in June, July when the conditions are better. I've also walked the Primitivo in late March and had a little bit of snow. So I think it's just good for people to keep in mind that these are mountains that you're walking through.
Yeah.
There's
Yeah.
not a lot of support. There aren't a lot of bailout options. Like there is a highway, but the highway has no shoulder. And if there was snow and bad conditions and you were there and not visible and it's hard for cars to brake quickly, I mean, it's just a bad formula. So
Hmm.
it's a place that you want to be clear that the weather's accommodating. You want to plan a little bit about how you're going to handle food. But other than that, there's a very good amount of albergues along the way to
Hmm.
be able to break up the walk and like really good value. I mean, I had a night where I still paid €5 for a bed, like there's
That's awesome. Yeah.
yeah, so it does feel it's one of those routes kind of like the Camino de Madrid where it feels like you've gone back in time 10 years on the Camino.
Which is fun. With the Norte, I feel like you walked so many variants this time, but it seems like you started in France this year. Is that right?
Yeah, which I think people should consider because that first day from Irun up and over to San Sebastian is rough and
Right.
there's not a lot of beds if you want to stop along the way. Like there's an albergue in Pasajes, but it doesn't have a lot of beds and it doesn't open until 4 p.m. And like, are you going to get one of those beds? Like it's a bit of a gamble. You could get on a bus if you needed to get to a bed, but in a lot of cases, people need to make that full walk from Irun to
Hmm.
San Sebastian, and it's tiring. Whereas you could start in Bayonne, and a lot of people are going to fly in to, they might fly into Biarritz, or if they fly into Paris, Bayonne is, it's not a terrible train ride coming down. And there's a fully waymarked Camino, a chemin, that goes from Bayonne. I just happen to think that it doesn't follow a particularly attractive route in many places. So
Okay.
from Bayonne, it's inland, it's on pavement a lot of the time, it's a lot of neighborhoods. It's not actively bad walking by
Yeah.
any means, but you've spent months getting ready for your Camino, and maybe it's like mildly deflating to be walking through neighborhoods on pavement for much of the day. So instead, this time I wanted to check out like you can follow the river west from Bayonne, get to the
Hmm.
coast, wrap around the coast, and then come down and follow the coast through Biarritz, which is
Oh,
a
cool.
famous
Yeah.
surfing town, and then continue on through like Bidart, Guétari, down to Saint-Jean-de-Luz, which has pilgrim accommodation, and
Hmm.
then you can continue on from there. So it's longer, of course, because you're looping all the way out along the river and then around the coast, whereas the official route is more direct. But you have beaches almost all the way, some really lovely walking. You're not on roads with cars most of the time. And this is one of those things, right? Like, and this is going to be true for a lot of the variants. If you have the time, you can take a more scenic approach and buy yourself an extra day with French bakeries and get your legs back under you after flying over and dealing with jet lag, walk on mostly flat terrain, finally
Hmm.
either walk into Irun or take the ferry across into Ondarribia, and then
Hmm.
you can tackle the fringes of the Pyrenees. I think it's a really nice option for people who have the time, and I think it's better walking than the chemin.
I mean, that makes perfect sense. It seems like it'd be really nice to fly in and have a couple of easier days along the coast and get to enjoy some of that. Like Saint-Jean-de-Luz is a really pretty little town or city, and I haven't been to the others, but I bet they're great as well.
And you know, if people, for me, I love walking out of the airport. It's something that you can do
Yeah, yeah,
in
yeah.
Irun. Like San Sebastian
Hmm.
Airport is between Irun and Ondarribia, so you can literally walk out the front door and start your Camino. You could do the same with Biarritz Airport.
Oh,
So if you
nice.
didn't want to take the train up to Bayonne, you'd have, you know, a kilometer of unpleasant walking along a highway, and then you'd be on the coast and you could just continue from there. So also an option for people who are romantics and like the idea of not having to use any motorized transport once they touch down.
That does sound good. That is one of the best things about that flight into Arun or San Sebastian.
Yeah, it's unfortunate that there's only one airline that goes in there, so it can be tough to fit it into your travel plans, but it is pretty fun.
So then on the Norte, I know you were checking out like a handful of variants that you hadn't had the opportunity to do previously.
Yeah.
Are there any that stand out to you that you want to highlight?
The absolute biggest winner is a walk into Ribadesella. The main route going into Ribadesella is paved basically the whole way. And I'm talking about from near Naves, which goes through, you know, Via Ormes and Juarez. It's inland the whole time. You don't see the coast. The towns are fine, but like no one's ever written home to talk about all the things they saw in Via Ormes. But you can instead cut over from the beach in before you actually go into the center of Naves, and then you can go basically immediately to the coast. And there is a small beach that's actually inland. There's a small inlet that comes in
Oh,
and
cool.
feeds this little beach, just like a pocket beach. And then you're up on the cliffs walking along some remarkable geological formations as you move along here. And then you also like the arrival into Riba de Sella is absolutely stunning. I mean, you see the whole town, the mouth of the river, the beach of Riba de Sella, it all unfolds beneath you, and you
Nice.
arrive right in town. And it doesn't really add that much distance either,
Okay.
because that's the tricky thing now, right? Like most of the variants that I'm checking out this time are adding distance, and that's
Okay.
why I
Yeah.
haven't checked them in the past. You know, like
Hmm.
if you
Hmm.
can have a boring 10 kilometers or a beautiful 12 kilometers, right? Like that's a no-brainer for most
Totally.
people. If they're feeling good and the weather's good, you make that trade-off. But when it's becoming 10 kilometers of pavement and not interesting, or 20 kilometers of coast, that gets a little bit harder when you're tired and sore and in your third week of walking the Camino. And that's, you know, that's like the walk into Navia that's further down. It's a really nice walk. It's on the coast the whole time, but it adds a lot of distance. And so you
Hmm.
really have to be committed to the idea to do it. I would say I really liked the coast, the following the GR out of Caravedo further on along that route. And you can follow the coast basically all the way around from Caravedo inland along the river to Hotel Canero. And then I've previously walked and promoted the coastal variant from Hotel Canero, the Ruta de la Congresa, which takes you into Luarca. And that's a winner
Nice.
because it basically doesn't add any distance.
Yeah.
So it's harder because you have the ups and downs that come when you hit rivers on the coast, but that is so great. You know, I think when for both of us when we originally walked the Norte, one of the reasons we preferred the Primitivo, it wasn't just the Primitivo. It's that the Norte after Gijon along the coast to Ribadeo is not as spectacular as the coast east of Gijon. And that's a hard comparison because it's so stunning in so many parts of the coast east of Gijón. But I've now had enough time like hunting around for those variants to say that you can have a really gorgeous walk along the Norte west of Gijón onto Ribadeo. Like there really are good options. So for me, like it's much easier now to sell the entirety of the Norte with conviction and say, yeah, if you're a multi-Camino person, it's worth it to do the whole Norte and then come back later for the Primitivo or the Salvador Primitivo combo.
Hmm.
Or, to throw out another idea, Norte Primitivo, and then come back later and do Salvador Norte so that you
There you
have the
go.
mountain and then the beach combo. And so that's another way to do it.
Totally. I wanted to ask you, I know you were looking at trying to find a variant to Oreo. Did that pan out? Did that fall apart?
So sometimes you go and try out variants and they succeed.
Uh-huh.
Sometimes they succeed beyond your wildest dreams, and sometimes you end up bleeding from many different cuts. So here's what I was looking at. So all of these things start with me staring at the GPS
Mhm.
tracks, looking for any place where it looks like a footpath or a trail exists, and then seeing if there is a sensible way of piecing together two different towns on the Norte where I think the walk is not very interesting. The walk from San Sebastian to Orio on the second stage of the Norte, it's fine. It's not a bad walk by any means. But it's also, compared with the first day or the third day, if you're
Mhm.
doing the GR through the Basque Coast Geopark, it's just not quite as interesting. You're inland most
Totally.
of the time. You can see the ocean. It's there, but you're not getting down to it. You're removed from it. There's, some pavement involved. And so I saw footpaths theoretically that would allow me to go down from like Barrio Igeldo, which is the little town just after San Sebastian. I would be able to walk down and have different points of coastal access. I would be in natural scenery. I'd be on trail, no pavement, and it would bring me around the coast and into Orio. So from the beach along the river instead of the cobblestone descent and around from the back. The fun part of this that actually worked is that from San Sebastian, you can walk uphill on the Camino, but there's also a funicular, a
Oh,
lift
cool.
that goes up from the western edge of the beach up onto the mountaintop. Now, it
Yeah.
doesn't open until mid-morning, late morning. So if you
Hmm.
slept in San Sebastian the night before, it might not be an option. It's never been an option for me to consider.
Hmm.
But this time I was coming through San Sebastian midday, and so I thought, hey, this will be fun. Take the funicular up to Monte Igeldo. Monte Igeldo is a recreation area. There's like a log flume and other rides and entertainment options. But the biggest thing is, I think it has the best view of San Sebastian from the top. Has a huge viewpoint. You can see everything below. It's magnificent. And then you just walk down the road for like a kilometer and you rejoin the Camino del Norte. So it works really well in terms of a scenic detour and also gets you out of the uphill. That worked. And then I got to Barrio Igeldo and I started down this detour. And I discovered that there were some old red and white stripes. So this was
Okay.
once the GR. But I could also see that there were nice new red and white stripes that were on the official Norte.
Oh,
So at
okay.
some point, the old GR like
Hmm.
became the old GR, right? Like it was rerouted. And I don't know if anybody has walked it since because it was badly overgrown, but just good enough for me to keep dragging myself forward through it until
Hmm.
I don't know how many kilometers in, I finally got to the point where I think I discovered why it might have been rerouted because the entire like landscape fell out beneath my feet. So
Yeah. Okay.
there it was no longer viable to continue. Like I would have needed a machete and a week to get forward from there and to find a way to reconnect with the route. And then the unfortunate thing was there wasn't really a bailout point. I had to backtrack through all of those brambles for multiple
Just like the
kilometers
worst, yeah.
before I could get back. So yeah, that didn't work. There was one other route that I scouted and I wanted to work, which was a coastal approach further on Cobreses. You can walk down to the main Camino now goes down to the beach from Cobreses, and then it
Okay.
cuts back inland and it goes through like La Iglesia and Pando, and it's
Yep.
inland all the way into Comillas. It is possible to follow the coast instead, but you're not really on the coast. And then there was a bridge that was out, and I had to end up on the highway and doubling back around. So there were a couple failures there. And the point I make from this for people who don't mind a little self-promotion is this is the value of having a guidebook. And hopefully, like guidebook authors are doing this, which is actually rewalking the trails that are in the book, like getting boots on the ground. There's a lot of GPS tracks out there that you can download, but there's not necessarily any quality control. Who knows how often they're being used? I don't know how many of the apps the owners are actually like walking all of those trails that are being included in the apps. It seems like completely impossible to me. You can depend to some degree on like the wisdom of crowds and get feedback from other people who are following and walking. But if it's in the book, I've walked it, and you've walked it in the past, and in most cases, I've now walked it multiple times, and so that not only allows me to say like, yes, I can say firsthand that it's viable, and here's what the conditions were like when I walked it, but also have some experience on like, this was the old route. It's not the current route, but in 2 years, it might be the new route again, right? So like understand the history and where like old waymarks might still be lingering to trick people, because that's one of the realities on the Norte. I mean, if you walk through Castro Urdiales,
That's
you
yeah,
can walk on 5 different streets and find a Camino waymark. They're all there. So
totally.
I mean, it's like an archaeological dig. There are layers of the Norte waymarks that you stumble across all over the place.
Totally. And you have a particularly keen sense of finding new routes or the old route or the route maybe we ought to be on. I remember our trip in Noha and we were,
I was just thinking
I
at the
don't know
same
where we
moment.
were coming out of a grocery store or something, and you said, I don't know, you've just found this arrow and you're like, climb over this barbed wire fence and here we go.
I mean, we were walking along, and I mean, I say this is in part as a joke, but in part because it's true. Like after a while,
It's
the
true.
yellow arrows, they just call to you, and we were walking along, and I remember it was a turn that was like off to the right and behind us, and there was an arrow back there, but like it was not close, but there was that moment where it just like it told me to look. And I do think that there is some measure of yellow arrow intuition that you cultivate just by walking and paying attention. And because we had the disadvantage and the luxury of walking a lot of caminos without GPS and
Yeah.
without apps, right? So you made it or you didn't based on your ability to find waymarks, which often weren't great. And so you really have to develop that sense of having your head on a swivel, looking in all directions, anticipating the different kinds of places where waymarks are painted. And it's paid off for me. I do think people should work hard to cultivate that still. And I think it's really nice to have a GPS track as a fallback. Like I think it's nice that when you do damage with a wrong turn, that it's 5 minutes of damage and not 30 minutes or more.
And it's nice, cultivating it means that you're not pulling out your phone all the time. Like it's nice to be able to rely on the arrows as much as possible.
Yeah, absolutely.
You mentioned Castro Urdiales. I feel like every time I walked, there was a different route into town. Is there an official route that feels good?
Yeah, it's funny you ask. After walking through Castro, I said to someone who runs an accommodation in Cantabria that I don't think Cantabria actually cares about the Camino. I was getting so frustrated with the state of the waymarking. Like a lot of the waymarks that exist in Cantabria are the same exact ones that you would have seen the last time you were there.
Hmm.
Like not repainted, decrepit old wooden
Totally.
signs that are toppling. Like they were old when you walked it last, you
Right.
know? And at the same time, there are so many beautiful variants that don't
Hmm.
impose problems that really mesh well with the schedule. And the walk into Castro Urdiales is the prime example of that. So when you are coming into Castro Urdiales, you will get near or into the small town of Mioño.
Hmm.
So Mioño has a small beach. The official route from Onton into Castro Urdiales swings wide inland and it goes like through Samano, Santuyan. It goes all the Otañez.
That goes like up the hill.
Nobody who knows better follows that route.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
There's not a great argument for following it. It's paved the whole way. It's not very interesting. It's a lot longer. So most people are going to get on the highway from
Hmm.
Onton. And they're going to be on the highway for a little bit, and nobody likes walking on a highway, but most cars have moved over to the expressway now, so there's not a lot of traffic. There's enough of a shoulder so that most of the time it's not an issue, and it's just the best of, not interesting options. But when you get near Mioño, you can fork off of the highway onto a footpath that takes you down to the beach. And then from the beach outside of Mioño, you can climb back up onto the coastal hill and you can just follow the coast into Castro Urdiales. However, there are exactly zero waymarks from the beach telling you to do that, despite the fact that this route has been known and existed and in our guidebook for I don't know how many years now.
A long time.
It
A
is,
long time,
it
yeah.
doesn't add distance. It's beautiful walking, but instead, now, not only do the waymarks take you into Mioño, but they actually take you onto that footpath, off of the highway, all the way out to the beach, and then all the way back into Mioño. And then they take you further inland, where there are two possibilities. One is that you follow the tunnel. So there's an old tunnel that's been converted now for walkers. So it's paved a lot of the way, but not entirely. It's not a bad walk, but like it then also drops you into Castro Urdiales on pavement near the highway. Or you may well be confused by the bright yellow arrows that are encouraging you to go into Santuyan, which has an albergue and makes an
Mm.
even wider loop on pavement inland before doubling back around to Castro Urdiales. Now, you might want to
Hmm.
stay at the albergue in Santuyan. It's fine. But it boggles the mind that the coastal option isn't being presented to anyone as a good option. And instead, people are being led on these multiple possible options that are inland and paved and not as interesting. And all of that just contributes to all of the narratives out there about the Camino's all on pavement,
Mm.
the Norte's all on pavement, Cantabria's all on pavement. And look, you're going to have a fair amount of pavement in Cantabria, no matter what you do. Like there's no way around it. There's going to be some pavement, but it could be so much better. And that walk into Castro Urdiales is a no-brainer. It's a stunner. People should do it.
Totally. And I think it's funny you mentioned just that Mioño, how confusing it can be. The last time I walked that for the guidebook, having previously done the beach route, but also previously done the tunnel route, I got turned around. And was like, wait, where am I? And I had to backtrack, even having done the like tunnel route maybe multiple times. I was specifically not doing the coastal route to we
Yep.
had planned for me to walk that way. And it's just shocking how if you're not paying close attention, it's easy. I think I ended up on those arrows towards Centurion or something, who
Yeah.
knows, but it's not well marked.
Yeah, who knows? And I want to be clear when I'm criticizing Cantabria, I'm not criticizing like the Amigos del Camino in Cantabria. They're volunteers and they're pitching in where they can. It's more about like the region investing in this. You can walk through other parts of the Camino on the Norte and elsewhere where you can see that there has been a significant investment in signage, in waymarking, in having very clear description of alternatives when there is a route split. Like all of that would be helpful. And it doesn't look like there's been any such investment in infrastructure there.
That's too bad because it is a nice, I mean, Cantabria is really, it is really beautiful. It's a great section of the Camino if you're not frustrated by it. Yeah.
And look, they make more money off of the regular tourists than the pilgrims, right? So like that's, that it was explained to me that from a regional perspective, it makes more money to invest in the tourists who are staying in nice beach hotels as opposed to scrubby albergues. But it would be nice if they could shake a few coins out of the couch cushions to support pilgrims.
Do you have anything else you want to highlight from your Norte route?
You know what I would say is this was my first time walking the Norte in the spring. And so, I've walked in the summer before, mostly in the summer. One time it was very early fall, so really still pretty much summer. And then I spent a little bit of time in North Spain, but mostly the Inglés and the Mar in December, January. So spring was different, and I was lucky. Anytime you look in like forums, Facebook groups, like one of the most common questions people ask is always like, what's the weather going to be like in April, right? So in April, I had some rainy days the first week, couple the second week. And like the last 3 weeks, I don't think I really got rained on much.
That's awesome.
And I mentioned that people kept talking about how it had been a bad winter for rain. The trails were in great shape. Obviously, there were some places where you have to tiptoe around some mud, but that was actually rarely the case. By and large, like the trails I was on were in great shape. I was amazed by it every single day. And then if you look at some of the posts that are going around from May, like the Ruta Napoleon on the Camino Frances, like covered in snow, the Via Podiensis in May, like the Aubrac Plateau covered in snow, other people on the Norte in May talking about how it's been a downpour for like a week. So it's a roll of the dice, right? Like totally. I could have been soaked and wading through mud in April. Instead, I had great conditions. So I got lucky with the weather. And, let that be a warning, if you're thinking about where you're going to sign up. You can get blasted with rain anytime. You can have good weather anytime. Harder than ever before to predict what weather's going to be like year to year. The numbers of pilgrims were highly variable. So I think about the night that I spent in Lorenza, which is just after the Norte moves inland. The albergue was full. The albergue's private rooms were full to the point that there was a crowd at one point getting mad that there weren't actually enough rooms for all of their people that they had reserved.
Oh, wow.
So whoops. But, it's not an albergue on the scale of some of the ones on the Frances. So this might have been 25 people, but there were other albergues in Lorenza and private rooms. Whereas when I stayed in Luarca, in the albergue there, I think there were 6 or 7 people. And that's the only albergue in town, and that's a typical end of a stage. So, some spikes and some declines. I walked during Holy Week, and there were definitely a number of people who were out walking only for the holiday week. And so some families that were walking. And so the albergue in Deba, it wasn't quite full, but it was much more full than I was expecting. Like my room was full of people. And so I think there might have been 25 people in Deba the night that I was there. Okay. So really, like, you could have a day where you saw almost nobody and there was just a handful of pilgrims. And there were days where there were 20 to 25 as I walked. So I started in late March and I walked almost through the end of April. So that was interesting to see. And then, the other thing is just flowers are in bloom, and that's pretty fun. That really stood out to me on the Mar even more than the Norte, but it's something that you have to marvel at, is just how green everything is. And still the case usually in July and August on the North Coast, it doesn't get scorched the way that the Frances does, but I enjoyed it. And plenty of stuff was open. A lot of places, if they're not open all year, they open around the time of Easter. And so it was no trouble being able to get a coffee, getting food, and getting beds on the Norte in April.
Nice. No, that's great. And I think that You can look at what the weather is in aggregate, but that doesn't mean anything for the particular week you're there. Yeah, it's just a roll of the dice, like you said. So,
Even when I would look at the next 3 days, often it ended up being much better than, what the forecast called for. So, we've gotten way better at predicting the weather like day by day, but you can't control the weather. You can't plan for it like you can plan in terms of what you pack and the gear that you have, but yeah, at some point your trip's probably going to get messed up by it.
did you end up being able to participate in any of the Easter week festivities or witness them?
It was kind of disappointing how it played out, and part of it's on me, right? Like when I plan out these trips, the priority is covering ground, because like in this case I had 5 weeks to do as
Hmm.
much as possible on the Norte, Salvador, Inglés, and Mar, which is obviously not a lot of time. And so the day that I arrived in Bilbao was the beginning of Holy Week, and
Hmm.
they had a big event, and it was in the morning. So I arrived after the procession was done for the day, and like the streets were filled with people who were out drinking. And there was some live music, so like some of that, it was certainly in fiesta mode. But in terms of big lavish processions going around, I missed that. And then in Santander, I was there, at a good time for it. I missed the one in the morning. And
Yeah.
then they were going to have a procession at 10 p.m.
Oh gosh.
And I sat staring at that and it was just like, I'm not, I'm not, I'm not doing that. Like,
Yeah, totally.
I'd like to see the procession, and I would be fine. Like, I would wake up the next morning and I'd drink an extra coffee and I'd move forward, because it would also have been a 30-minute walk from wherever my place was to get to where the procession was. And then whatever time I get back, it just, the appeal wasn't strong enough to get me out of the hostel at that hour. The one Easter experience I had was in Comillas. So I decided to take a day
Okay.
off on Easter. It was a good time to catch up on things. And I just want to hang out in Comillas. It's a beautiful town. It
Totally.
seemed like a good place to stay. And so they had Easter Mass in the morning and then nothing else. But the cool thing was that all of the monuments, the Gaudi, the palace, the seminary, they were all open for visits
Awesome.
on Easter. So it ended up being perfect. The albergue there, it's a little bit on the pricier side as far as albergues go, but it has a kitchen. And so I just spent a lot of time working in the kitchen and making food when I felt like it, and then, wandered around and hung out in Comillas. So that was my Easter experience.
That
And
sounds great though.
yeah,
I mean, getting to go into the Gaudi, the seminary, and
it was cool. Yeah, it was nice. It was a day well spent.
so you walk the Lebaniego again, and that starts on the Norte.
Yeah, so I was going to walk the Lebaniego in reverse. Most people are going to go from San Vicente de la Barquera on the norte up to Potes and then onto the monastery, which is reputed to have the largest surviving piece of the True Cross. And just based on the bus schedule, it made more sense for me to bus up when I arrived in Unquera instead of just walking, and then walk back down and just be able to continue on. So I sat at the bus station. I got there like 10 minutes early and I sat, and then, those 10 minutes passed, and then 10 more minutes passed. There was another guy there, so I felt comforted by the fact, reassured that there was another person there. And then a car pulled up and picked him up. And I don't know if there's a more dispiriting feeling, like the sense of imminent doom when you are sitting at a bus stop and you think the bus is supposed to come at a particular time and the minutes just keep going past. But eventually I reached the point where I just thought the bus isn't coming. It was the only bus coming to go up there until like 7 hours later. So I walked over to the highway, stuck my thumb out, and an hour and a half and two different vehicles later, I made it up to Potes and then started walking. And so this is my second time on the Lebaniego, and kind of like the Salvador, it's cool to be able to see it in both directions. And I think I was surprised by two things. One, I thought there would be more like up-to-date signage and infrastructure along the way because it had been a holy year for the Lebaniego a year earlier. But
Hmm.
once again, there was not a lot of indication that Cantabria had invested. So I think basically all the signs and waymarks had been there the last time that I had been
Okay.
there. So they're not in great shape. They're good enough. And if you have GPS tracks, you're fine. But I was surprised by the amount of people walking.
Hmm.
This was not Easter week. This was after, but I think a number of people have the week off after Easter. But there were a number of groups walking on the Lebaniego. There were days where, the first big albergue south of the Norte, like the first one you would hit, where most people would have their stage completed walking their first day on the Lebaniego. The albergue was full. And
Oh,
it
wow.
has like, I don't know, 25 or more beds. I mean,
Okay.
it's not tiny. And it was full. And like one person actually had to arrange for a ride to move ahead. So maybe just a weird week. Maybe some families had booked this the week after Easter. But I was surprised that it's drawing more people. And I think it's kind of like the Inglés for Cantabria and for this part of Spain, where it's like don't have time to walk a quote unquote
Hmm.
full Camino, but I can come out and walk the Lebaniego, and I can do that in, from San Vicente in 4 comfortable days, maybe
Hmm.
5 if I really want to take it easy. And so that's like a really good little Camino to do for a week. And you start on the beach and then you go in the mountains, and
Hmm.
it is a real, legitimate pilgrimage. It has
Hmm.
a significant shrine and history behind it. And there's really good albergue infrastructure all along the way. So I do think it's caught on more than I appreciated. And then, of course, it's possible to continue on the Lebaniego. It becomes the Vadiniense through the mountains
Hmm.
and rejoins the Camino Frances in Mancia de las Mulas. But I only met like 1 or 2 people who were doing that. Almost everyone was finishing in Santo Toribio.
I'm assuming that was a lot more folks than you saw when you did it 10 years ago.
I think I saw 2 people. Yeah.
Okay, wow. Okay, yeah. So
Yeah.
radically different.
Yeah. And the funny thing is that most of these albergues were all there, back when I did it before.
Yeah.
And I walked through along just wondering, how on earth do these places survive? And now they're getting enough traffic for them to be viable. And it's kind of similar to the Salvador in that there aren't a lot of services along the way. So
Hmm.
you're really reliant on your albergues for dinner and breakfast. I guess it's also comparable to the Via Podiensis for like demi pension, like having dinner and
Hmm.
breakfast in the albergue is part of the experience along the way.
That seems like a nice option, and like you said, you could add the Vadinians onto it and,
Yeah.
make it all the way back to the Frances and then head on.
I mean, every day there's a new like branch of the Camino coming up here, right? There's also the Camino Olvidado, which connects. You can go through the mountains and connect with the Salvador, and I mean, it's impossible to keep up with all of the new routes that are developing in these areas.
Any other Lebaniego stories or thoughts?
The only thing I'd say is just people should think through how they're gonna finish. So you get to Potes. It's a town 2.5, 3 kilometers before the monastery, and there's no like bus going between them. If you want to like be able to actually touch the relic, then you need to be there in the morning for a mass. And if you want to get the certificate, you need to be there like in the morning or in the afternoon. If
Hmm.
you go there in the middle of the day, like you can still get in the church, but you're going to miss out on that stuff. So I just think that that's the big logistical consideration with the Le Baniego is that if you don't time your visit to the monastery well, then you might be disappointed.
And then is there an easy bus back from Potes to the Norte if you're trying to find it?
Yeah, you would probably be connecting back to Uncara, though you could also bus through to Santander. The bus exists. It's just, it maybe runs 2, 3 times a day, and who knows, maybe the bus won't show up at all, right? So
It's part of the adventure.
yeah, you have to have a sense of humor about it, I think. Yeah, so I think for most people, like they get to the end and they're done, right? So it's okay to hang out. Potes is a beautiful town, and
Hmm.
so it's great. Like have a night there, hang out. But if you're like me and you're trying to keep moving and you've got
Hmm.
ground to cover, it can be a little tricky, and so it's something that you really have to plan for.
I remember, like when I went to Potes, I took the bus to Potes and continued from there. But it's a beautiful spot. I think, it
Yeah.
seems worth it if you have the time.
Yeah. There aren't a lot of towns on the Le Baniego, right? Like there's very small villages. So like, this is the only place that really qualifies as an urban area.
Yeah. So then after you walked that, you ended up back on the Norte and then on the Mar for
Yeah.
the end of your trip.
Yeah. I didn't have enough time to do a thorough job of the Mar, so I was picking and choosing. The biggest thing I wanted to check this time is so the Camino del Mar breaks off of the Norte in Ribadeo and it continues along the coast. And the first day on the Camino del Mar goes through Praia das Catedrales, Cathedral Beach, which is one of the most famous ones in Spain. And if you can get there at low tide, then the rock formations in the water, they look like cathedrals, or so they say. So that's the highlight. And I know there are people on the Norte who will take a day off in Ribadeo in order to bus out or train out to Cathedral Beach and see it, and then they come back. A little bit further along the Camino del Mar is the Basilica of Mondoñedo. And Mondoñedo might sound familiar because it's also a town on the Norte that has one of the greatest cathedrals on the Norte. It's gorgeous. So that exists because the old basilica was at risk of being raided by pirates or Vikings or whoever. So it was just too close and too vulnerable. So they relocated it inland where it would be safer. They kept the same name, Mondoñedo. A route has been created, the Camino de San Rosendo, that connects the two Mondoñedos.
Oh, cool.
So you can have that link. And the exciting thing for me about that is people on the Norte could potentially go along the Mar for a day, walk through Cathedral Beach. They could see the Basilica of Mondoñedo. They'd have to overnight somewhere in there. There's some hotels that they could do. And then they can walk back to the Norte in Mondoñedo along this route. So I wanted to scout that this time. It's a nice walking route. It's a footpath or a dirt track that goes along the river much of the time, a good amount of shade. And so you could really have a lovely extension of the Norte that brings in those two highlights of the Mar and then get back to Mondoñedo. It adds distance, of course, but it doesn't add a dramatic amount of distance because the Norte heading towards Lorenza moves southwest. So it works pretty well with the geography. And I just really like that as an option that people could consider.
How many stages is it from when you turn off onto the Mar back to Mondoñedo?
I think you could do it in 2 days.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Quick.
Yeah, it's not huge. And those aren't two of my days, right? Like those are 2 days that people might be happy walking. You could do it in 3 if you went all the way into the town of Foz on the Mar, but I think it would be feasible to do it in 2, but otherwise you're not missing much of consequence on the Norte.
I mean, that sounds like a great option.
I think it's pretty good. Yeah. And then from there I did some of the coastal variants. So the Mar, it has basically, you have the Camino del Mar, the official, which is often inland and more pavement than ideal, or you can follow for much of the route the Camino Cantabrico, which holds much more closely to the coast. And there's some places where I think the Mar is better. A lot of the time the walking is better on the Cantabrico. So I spent a couple days on the Cantabrico, and I think especially the walk that I did from Vivero, which is a beautiful town, up and around the coast to the north and then back down, is one of the most beautiful stretches of walking that you can have in northern Spain. And then I followed the official Mar from the sanctuary of Tejido, which is one of the most important pilgrimage shrines in Spain. I followed the Mar directly back to Subia near Neda on the Camino Inglés, where it intersects the Inglés, and you can continue on from there. And like I prefer the coast from Tejido all the way around to Ferrol, but it probably adds at least 2 days. It's a lot more kilometers. And the walk down is fine. I don't like the final approach into Subia, but so it goes. And the biggest thing to highlight is, when I first walked the Mar, we had this conversation, it was barely in existence and there were just enough waymarks to like lead you astray. And now there are very consistent yellow arrows.
That's awesome.
It's not perfect. Like there were a couple of stretches where I couldn't figure out where the heck they went. And some of the waymarks, like In a lot of places, they're having to go with spray paint on the road. You have to look down. And of course, then any car that drives over is going to erode those faster. So it's not a permanent solution, but they're there and they weren't there
Yeah.
before. And the Cantabrico waymarking has been good. So you still want to have GPS tracks, of course, but it's more walkable than it has ever been. And it's really
Yeah.
exciting.
And how's the infrastructure as far as like albergues or services? Like,
Yeah,
are there
yeah.
places for folks to stay?
So theoretically, there's a hostel in Foz. I stayed there
Okay.
once.
Okay.
They never reply to any of my attempts at communication, but Google Maps assures me that they still exist. Vivero has a hostel, Olivita, that's run by
Okay.
Oliva, who's a huge advocate of the Mar. There are some
Cool.
people who will stay there for multiple days and use the bus or the train to like go back and forth along the Mar. There are a couple of surf hostels further
Mm.
on if you take the coastal routes in places. So, like Valdovino, Praia de Pantin, that have dorm beds available. They're not, Albergue de Peregrinos priced,
Mm.
but they are there. And then, it's an interesting thing on the Mar. There are some hotels that are just really inexpensively priced. So, like, I stayed in one in El Vicedo where I spent 30 euros for a private room, which, given that these days there are a lot of places on the coast where you're spending 22 to 24, 25 euros for a dorm bed, like 30 euros for a private room is really good. Obviously prices shoot up in summer, but even walking in summer, there were places where I could still get a private room at a good rate, and even better if you're walking with a second person. So I do think it's possible if you plan it out, and maybe if you're willing to use a bus or a train to skip ahead in certain places where you could get by on 25 euros a day, especially if you're traveling with a second person.
That's great. And so it does feel like a pretty doable route these days.
It's getting there. Yeah.
Yeah, that's awesome.
There's, not many people are out there walking it. I saw two other people, but
Okay.
when I checked into the hotel, they said, "Do you want a stamp?" Which kind of blew
Oh,
my mind, right? Like, holy crap, they have a Camino del Mar stamp. So even something like that, that exists now, that you walk
yeah.
into a tourism office and they know what it is. So,
Yeah.
I think that that's exciting. And yeah, the missing piece is the region investing in albergue infrastructure
Hmm.
along with signage that will survive over time.
Totally.
That's still to come, but with that will come people. So
Right,
if,
right.
if people want incredible natural beauty and solitude, like they have it on the Mar right now.
Did you walk into Farrell or did you end up busing ahead and
So I walked into Zubia. So because I
okay.
followed, so the official Mar joins it in Zubia, which is right around the 100-kilometer mark.
Okay.
And the coastal route loops all the way around and comes into Ferrol.
Okay, okay.
So this time it was the official. And so I followed the Inglés for a ways down, and it all looked very familiar. There were about 20 people in the albergue in Ponte Dueme. And that's
That's a lot.
especially because I think a lot of people are put off by the municipal in Ponte Dueme. The price is unbeatable. It's kind of a cave. Like there are no windows, no natural lighting. The shower doesn't really drain. It's an old like fishing warehouse. It's great value. There's a private albergue in Ponte Dueme now, and so people who want, the private outlet at their bed and Wi-Fi and a refrigerator, they pay 10 euros more and they stay at the private. So I don't know how many pilgrims were actually spread out across Ponte Dueme, but yeah, it was the Inglés was doing pretty well for walkers in April. I would say the most noteworthy development, especially since you were the first one of us to scout the Inglés from A Coruña, is that there
Hmm.
are actually waymarks in A Coruña these days.
Oh, well, there you go. That is new.
Like even when I was rewalking the Inglés, I don't know what it was, 6, 7 years ago. I remember
Hmm.
walking into the tourism office in A Coruña and saying, "Hey, could you update me on the route of the Camino out of A Coruña?" And they were like, "What?" It was basically like, "What's the Camino?"
Totally. I mean, that was definitely my experience. And I remember feeling like just very surprised by it, especially because I walked out. to like the Tower of Hercules, like that area, and some
Yeah.
folks there who are also tourists were like, "Oh, are you doing a Camino?" They like saw my, so it started out with this very like, "Oh, there's people who know the thing that I'm doing, so obviously there must be
Yeah.
sure around it." And then it just was not the case. Yeah, I remember feeling like very lost on the way out of town there.
It's a lot better now. It's still a little spotty, like right in the historical center. But once you get onto the main road, the route parallels for a lot of the way out, it's
Hmm.
very, very consistent signage. Again, official junta signage, right? Like the region
Hmm.
has invested in this. The other thing that was different for me this time is I've had bad luck getting into the Iglesia de Santiago when I have stayed there in the
Hmm.
past in Coruña. This is the first time for me that I was able to go inside, and it's
Oh,
great.
nice.
Oh my gosh, the interior of that church is gorgeous. Again,
Yeah.
was able to get a stamp there, but multiple like really interesting representations of Santiago. I think more and more people are starting their Inglés in A Coruña. The Irish will
Okay.
call it the Celtic Camino, but other people, if they walk one of these mini pilgrimages like in the US or in England, they can get 25 kilometers of credit so that they can start in A Coruña and still get to
Interesting. Okay.
Compostela. And so I would just say, if that's you, like give yourself that extra day in A Coruña so that they can do what you did, which is go walk around the peninsula past the Tower of Hercules, the oldest lighthouse, the Roman lighthouse that's still
Hmm.
there, go up around the beaches.
And that part is cool. I mean, it's cool to go see all of that.
Yeah, like it makes a perfect 1 day activity. Make sure that you can get to the Iglesia de Santiago when it's open, and then you can start fresh the next morning.
Yeah, I think that seems like a great way to do the Inglés is to have a nice stay in A Coruña to start.
And then, after that I was in Santiago for, 1 night. I went and I sat in the plaza and I watched two different groups of American teenagers filming TikToks.
Oh no.
And there, there
Okay.
there there has to be room for everyone, but for one moment I could get on board with the anti-tourist movement in Santiago de Compostela.
Yeah. Yeah, I wonder, the last time you walked the Camino, like leading students, how we would always enforce like no phones on our trips.
Yep.
And I'm assuming you continued with that, but
Oh
how,
yes. Yeah.
which is a delight, not to have that technology.
A delight
But
for the
like,
students as well.
right, that's what I was gonna say. Like, did
Yeah.
that continue feeling like the kids were on board with it once they had their initial,
100%.
yeah.
Like they had to navigate like the emotional grief over like Snapchat streaks ending, or they would find a designated person to leave their phone with to keep the streaks going while they were gone. So there was some gnashing of teeth before departure. And there's always some practical reflections about, it would be nice to be able to use the phone to like translate the ingredients list
Totally.
or whatever, like to be able to film a video of something meaningful like it. And I agree, like yeah, there are lots of ways where it would be nice to be able to have this practical tool, but it's also crack
Hmm.
cocaine in your backpack, right? As an addict,
Totally.
like you, so I mean we learned this, that the students don't have the self-restraint to limit themselves to using it as a tool. And frankly,
Hmm.
the adults don't either. And
Totally.
everyone who's walked the Camino for a long time has the same reflection that like the the access to all of the things on smartphones has become a barrier in places. And I mean, I think I see it even more palpably on some of these routes where it's easy to fall into a habit of isolation because you aren't around people as much, and then
Hmm.
you fall back into your phone. And
Hmm.
so I think on the Camino Frances you are saturated in social
Totally.
conditions that I think it pulls people in more, whereas on other routes you spend a lot of time alone, and you just get in the habit of being a loner. And I
Hmm.
think that I felt that in many places. And my condition is different because I'm parachuting into different social groups, like
Yeah.
I'm rarely seeing the same people twice because I'm going further. And yet it was a pretty consistent dynamic that when I would get into the albergue, everyone would be kind of off on their own,
Oh,
and
interesting.
there wasn't a lot of like communal stuff happening outside of the groups, right? The duos, the trios, the groups of four that were walking together that would silo off on their own.
Hmm.
So I do think it makes it easier to fall off into your own world and focus on staying connected with people at home. I don't want to relitigate technology. It has its good and its bad, and people are going to use it however they want to use it. But certainly, from an educational perspective and working with high schoolers, a month of detox was a fantastic thing.
And good for adults too. I mean, if we can do it, it's nice. On the phone note of phones, like I know you mentioned a few months ago you were doing a ton of work on the app for Cicerone for the guidebook.
Yeah.
How is that coming together and what are your thoughts sort of on folks using that or like, the guidebook in general? I know I'm always a fan of like trying to get away from having to pull out my phone when I can, but I know the app I'm sure has value as well.
Yeah, I mean, I'm ambivalent about it. So Cicerone's launching an app. If you didn't know that, now you do. It does exist. There are some books that are available for it. The Via Podiensis guide was supposed to launch for it in January. A lot of the foundation is in place for the other routes, so that when the new editions of the guidebooks come out, those apps will also launch. Part of this is just like acknowledging reality, right? There's a lot of people who just don't want books. They're
Mm-hmm.
not going to pay for books. They're not going to read books. The average American, swallows more spiders in a year than they read books, right? So this is where we are. Like people are getting AI summaries of books instead of, reading books. So like let's just be real. So as a publisher, like Cicerone has to adapt or perish.
Mm-hmm.
And so it makes sense that if you are going to have all of this material for print form, then why not find a way to convert it into app form? And for people to potentially have both. Because a lot of people now, when they buy a guidebook, it's for home, it's for reading,
Mm-hmm.
it's for preparing, and then they don't bring it on the road. And so you could have the book, and then you could have the app equivalent. And so hopefully that's a combination that allows Cicerone to continue to be in business and push out all of the different guides moving forward. From my perspective, I think the upside of having an app version is just that it can be more up to date than a book. I think about how long it takes for a book to get from the moment that we submit it, we finish working on it, and it comes out in the world. Some of that's already outdated by the time it gets out there, right? So to be able to have updated accommodation information at all times, that's nice. I mean, that's definitely user friendly. And people are getting that from other apps anyway. So it makes sense that you could have it all in one place. And then I do put a lot of time into editing the GPS tracks, into having
Mm-hmm.
all of the variants. And I think there's a lot of people who don't want to go through the process of downloading the GPS tracks from the Cicerone site and then uploading that into whatever app they use on their phone
Mm.
to follow along. So instead, they might read about the route in the book and then go find something on Wikiloc or whatever download site, and they would download it. But that track hasn't been edited.
Right.
Like there's no quality control there. So I think it's good that people are going to have access to it in that form, but I there was the thought going through my head as I was doing the work that's like, am I putting in a lot more unpaid hours into something so that people can pay $10 for this product instead of $20 or whatever? Like part of
Yeah.
me was just like, I see the business, I see the advantage of this model for Cicerone. What's in it for me? I'm not sure, but we'll roll it out and see what happens.
I mean, I think if folks are gonna walk, they should pay the money for a book and be able to enjoy, I don't know, having something physical seems so useful to me. But again, I'm a creature of the book world, so what do I know?
Yeah, our generation is fading out. I mean, the other thing I would say is again, this is self-promotional here. Nobody believes in paying for content anymore. And AI is just pushing that to another level
Yeah.
where AI has stolen all of the content, right? Like that is what it has done.
Right.
It has stolen the content to train its models. And what AI puts out then is only as good as the content that's been stolen. Same thing for all of the information that gets shared in forums and elsewhere. And there are a lot of generous people who walk their Camino and then they put good information online that can be shared.
Mm-hmm.
But there's also zero accountability. If you're publishing something, if you are a public-facing guidebook author, you are going to be held accountable for it, and you are going to follow through on keeping it updated and verifying it. And I would like to think that people would say, that's a service worth paying $20 for, in a trip that you're spending, well over $1,000 for.
Totally.
That's a worthwhile investment. Again, even if you don't carry the book on the route, you can read it a little bit before you go, and you're also it's an investment. That's a self-serving statement, but I do think it's true that especially on less traveled routes, the guidebook authors are often one of the few groups that are making sure that that information is, as up to date as you can make it. So I think it's a valuable service. I wish people would think of it as a service, and that's it. That's it for the self-promotion.
It seems like you've done a lot with the 5 weeks you had out there. You covered a lot of ground. You got a lot of updates.
It was pretty great. At the same time, it was also frustrating to just not be walking from point A to point B to point C, like straight through every single day and be connected with more pilgrims. So this was more work than a pilgrimage. So I was always mindful of that. But at the same time, I think you would be hard pressed to have a more beautiful 5 weeks of walking than I had.
Yeah, actually, that makes sense. Yeah.
Laura, thanks. Thanks for asking the questions and ensuring that this is not a gigantic monologue.
Oh, it's fun to hear about. I'm like already eager to go back at some point in the near future.
One last thought to offer on those 5 weeks in Spain. There are at least two ways that this walk was quite atypical from a pilgrimage perspective. First, I had to pop around a lot by public transportation. You heard how many different routes I referenced in the discussion. It's obviously not possible to cover all of those in their entirety in 5 weeks. But this was a guidebook updating and expanding trip, so I was operating around a long list of priorities. What to make of that experience, often weaving bus and train rides into the flow of long walking days? On one hand, it was surprisingly manageable. There were rarely as many buses operating as I would have liked, which resulted in some awkward days where I either needed to wake up earlier and walk faster than ideal, or accept a later than preferred connection in the deep afternoon. But in most cases, at least there were options. Rome to Rio was most helpful for lining these up, though Google Maps was the better option in a couple of cases. Be warned, though, these schedules change seasonally, if not more often. And if you're a planner like I am, you might map out a plan that is outdated by the time you arrive. That said, man, I hated how getting onto transportation kept yanking me out of the flow of walking. This also, of course, ripped me out of one group of pilgrims and tossed me direct into another. In particular, it forced me to constantly think about time, when the bus was coming, how fast I was moving, what time I would arrive, how much more walking I'd need to do, etc., etc. The second atypical element was that because of my commitment to the relay, I was spending multiple hours daily while on the road, working on the project, while also doing all of the guidebook stuff. One night I had to Zoom into a meeting at midnight, the only two rooms in the albergue with doors where I could at least muffle my voice, were the bathrooms. So I pulled a chair in and propped my laptop on the sink. Fortunately, there were only a couple other people in the albergue, and there was another bathroom. This reality, of course, also meant that I needed to have Wi-Fi access every day, which ruled out certain accommodations and forced me to organize around some suboptimal stages. When people have asked me about the viability of doing a Camino where they have to make some compromises because of obligations at home or time constraints or other factors, I've always said that an imperfect Camino is better than no Camino. In most regards, that is still true. I'm glad I went to Spain. I'm glad I had those 5 weeks, all the more so after these last couple of months. At the same time, it also wore on me, not just the length of some of the days, and they were long, but also knowing how great pilgrimage can be and how many ways I was shortchanging it on this trip. In the end, one of the best things I did was cramming 2 stages into one very long day so that I could take a full day off to deal with a bunch of work. Consolidating it into that off day meant that I also gained a few walking days with much less on my plate. I could just be a pilgrim. And it was better in that regard to sacrifice a day to preserve a few than it was to squeeze a smaller amount into every Camino day. I don't know if that's a useful lesson or a transferable one if you're ever in a similar position, but that's my main takeaway. And that's all for this episode. Thanks again to Laura Perazzoli for chatting with me. Laura and I are co-authors of the Cicerone guidebooks on the Camino del Norte, Primitivo, Inglés, and Mar. All episodes of the Camino Podcast can be found on Spotify, Apple, SoundCloud, and YouTube. You can reach me at caminopodcast@gmail.com and through the Camino Podcast Facebook page. Thank you for listening.
Nobody asked me